Excellent. Well, everyone, my name is Fari. I'm here with Pastor Kevin. Excited to dialogue with you.
Yeah, excited to be here with you.
Here we are. Welcome home.
Yes.
We missed you.
It feels good. You know what? It feels like that every time I come downtown. It just feels like home.
This is great.
I mean, we love Pitt Meadows, and Pitt Meadows is home, but there is something about being downtown.
Pitt Meadows loves you. So,
Yeah,
but I'm
amen.
glad that we get to dialogue around this topic about coming home.
Yes.
What a message. Did you ever lose any of your kids when they were younger?
Did I ever lose any of them? You know, that's an interesting question. I'd have to think about that. I don't think I ever had anything like that. I think
I think that
we
happened
were
with
pretty
me
good.
a couple times.
Yeah?
Horrible feeling.
Oh,
You're
bet.
like, your stomach just falls. You're like, my kid.
Where were you?
I think it was in like I don't know, one of those home sense places, I think. And you know how your kids go hide and you're like, somebody took my kid. It's all over. And
Yes.
and then you start looking for
Can't
them.
imagine
You
that.
start yelling their names out, right?
So you feel like the worst parent in the world at that point, too.
You do.
Yeah.
You do. And then you find them and you feel relieved, but also at the same time you're a little bit upset. You're like, why would you do this to me?
Isn't it funny that even in Scripture, Jesus got lost, right? Like Jesus stayed at the temple.
He's
his
like,
parents
I'm
left
about my
without
father's
him.
business.
Can you imagine that? It's like, you know, we just lost the Son of God.
I would have been very stressful.
That's what Mary would have been feeling, right? Oh, for sure.
But I think about like, when the father finds, when the son comes back, how amazing that was.
Yeah.
What kind of feeling that would have been for him. Again, like when I lost my kid, I was like, I was looking, I was for myself, I was stressed out. I wanted to find my lost child. And I think God is looking for his lost children. He doesn't get stressed out like we would do because God is all-knowing, all-powerful. He sees all things. In that sense, the illustration doesn't fully, completely go there. But that idea of expectancy and looking. And so when we talk about going out and finding, some people like sheep, they go and they're lost. Have you experienced that in the church where you've had some people that you've had to go look for?
Oh, for sure. And I think, you know, when I think of this topic, I feel like it really, you know, hits home, for lack of a better word. It's sometimes a tough one. You know, like, and you're a pastor, of course, and you had a campus before, and you know people that you haven't seen for a while. You know some stories of people, and you miss them, and it's hard sometimes to think about them. You know, you think about where they were, and then you think about maybe where they are now, and you know, you've given them a call, you've reached out to them, and so yeah, I think we're always thinking of that, and I think sometimes also, you know, thinking again of campus pastors or even our life group leaders, you know, I think there's a weight we sometimes feel when we don't see people for a while, but it's almost too hard to carry ourselves even in some ways. Like it's something where the whole body needs to be looking out for that lost sheep, not just us, but
Great point. Yeah, and that's something again, like you said, it's not just as pastors who are we're to be shepherding, but all of us are to look out for one another.
Absolutely.
And we talked about this again in the message a few weeks ago, this idea of you look out for one another, right? When you're like, man, I haven't seen Joe and life group for like 3 weeks.
Yes.
What's going on? So you don't just leave it for your life group leader where you're like, oh, he'll take care of it or she'll take care of it. But like you call out, you text.
Yes.
And then we get to the second point, this idea of praying fervently for them.
Yes.
That's a place that we need to be, all of us, right?
Absolutely. Well, and a big part of that's, you know, sometimes just going and having the conversations in that, it's possible that they are, like Pastor Dave said, you know, they're kind of in the rubble, they can't really see clearly, they haven't come to their senses. And so to help somebody come to their senses, it takes prayer, it takes this step, it's so important, and not to give up. And, you know, I was thinking this past week I was reflecting about myself. As a teenager, I used to go to church with my uncle. He's actually the one that led me to Christ. And it was a friend, it was actually wasn't even me, it was a friend of mine that wanted to go to church with my uncle. And I was like, really? Okay, well, if you're going to go to church, I guess I'll go to church with you then. And but we both came to Christ, and I was going to church with my uncle, but there was a season where I wandered off. And I quit going to church, and I started getting into the wrong crowd, started getting into trouble. And one of my uncle's friends at church, I had run into him one time just on the street. And, I remember at the time, I think he said something to me like, the ark is leaving soon, you better repent and come back to Jesus. It was one of those kind of conversations, and I just left. And I know he went on to tell my uncle just how terrible I was doing. It was like, man, you should see Kevin now. He's terrible. He's in the wrong crowd. He's so backslidden. And my uncle's response was, that's okay. He'll be back. And he said, I'm going to just keep praying for him. And that's what it was. I'm here today because I had an uncle that wouldn't quit praying for me when I was the prodigal son. And it allowed me to come to my senses. And one day I did come to my senses. And
wow,
here we are. Yeah.
That's powerful. And this, in Luke, really, we see that this word used, receive, that Jesus, when he was going to receive sinners and eat with them, in other words, we look at this, we're like, is Jesus just waiting for him to receive people? It's actually more than that. He's eagerly awaiting or expecting, and he's looking for.
Yes.
And that's the beautiful. He's looking for. And then he's using the church today, right? He's like, pray for the lost.
Yes.
Do as I would do. And so that's the amazing part of being part of the local church is we're looking for one another, and we do it in prayer, is that we're actually asking God to intercede wherever people are at today. And it's a spiritual battle. That's what we need to recognize. It's not just telling people you need to come back, but there's an actual spiritual pull that I believe is keeping people back as well. And that's where praying fervently comes in, which is huge.
And I think, and in this process, we, as the church, we need to have the heart, not so much of the son in that story, the prodigal's brother, but of the father. I sometimes think about how hard that must have been for that father, like how heartbroken he must have been, wondering how his son was doing, all those things. But he that would be something that we all naturally do, but he actually stayed in faith. He believed for his son, and he was expecting him. And it's interesting that he saw his son afar off, so he must have been, it's possible he was looking. That might have been part of his routine, is every day just checking. I wonder if he's back yet. I wonder if he's back yet. Because he was expecting him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, Jesus is telling again the story about the father to say, this is what God is like. And you have one son who's ungrateful, the son who's behind. He's like, I'm doing all this. Why aren't you throwing me a feast, right? And then you have the other son who just takes off.
Yes.
And so you have the father who's dealing with both graciously. And he's showing one who left that he's there with arms wide open. And the other one who's there, who's working, he's like, man, all this has always been yours. And that's something that we need to think about. Whichever son, like Pastor Dave, wherever you find yourself, know that God is gracious and that his arms are wide open.
Well, and I love how Pastor Dave pointed out the thread in this story is that it was all about home. This was all about bringing back the lost, whether it was a lost item or a lost person. It was all about getting it back home. And, that prodigal, or the prodigal son's brother always was home. But, when the prodigal son was brought home, I think that's a lot of times what people, when I think of the prodigals, I think of the ones that are out there. So often they find themselves wondering what kind of reception they're going to get when they come back to church. Are people going to judge them? Are people going to look down on them? But this really is the reaction that they. And a lot of times, if they just knew that I guarantee you, I promise you, when someone sees you, it's going to be like finding that lost wallet. It's going to be everybody's going to be so excited to see you and so welcoming. And that's what any prodigal son can look forward to.
And that's a great point. Again. If you find yourself outside of the church, or it's been a while now, maybe this is the first time you're watching this and you're like, man, I don't know what's going to happen if I go back. Know that we're going to receive you with love, with grace, and so is God. So thank you for staying with us. Again, love you all, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you, everyone.